Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, distinguished postgraduate students, esteemed organizational executives, valued colleagues, and friends. You are warmly welcome to Lecture 4 of the Research Methods Across Discipline lecture series. The next two slides provide relevant social media links for the lecture series and information about the series lecturer, Professor Linus Usuawu. I am Linus Usuawu, PhD valedictorian, full professor of marketing at Veritas University Abuja in Nigeria, former chair of the Institutional Review Board at the American University of Nigeria, AUN Yola, former pioneer vice chancellor of a university in Nigeria. I bring to this lecture series over 3 decades of experience in teaching, research, and university leadership. I've had the privilege of building academic institutions from the ground up, working as group head at Research International Lagos in Nigeria, and supervising many postgraduate students in Nigeria, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Afghanistan, among other places, thereby giving me first-hand experience of the challenges we will discuss in today's lecture. Recall that in Lecture 3, we explored research ethics and integrity. Today, in Lecture 4, we will have an honest conversation about the challenges of conducting research in the Global South. By the end of this lecture, you will understand that these challenges are not obstacles. They are invitations to innovate in research methods. So, let us continue our research journey. Stay curious, stay methodologically rigorous and flexible, and stay contextually relevant. Let's begin. Enjoy. The slide you are seeing contains information about the research methods across disciplines, a comprehensive lecture series for postgraduate students and organizational executives. You will see my LinkedIn profile link, my Google Scholar profile link, my YouTube channel link for the lecture series, my institutional affiliation. This slide presents profile of the series lecturer, Professor Linus Usuawu. Provides information about my academic background, my research interests, my LinkedIn profile link, my Google Scholar profile link, and my current institutional affiliation. Lecture 4 is titled Challenges of Conducting Research in the Global South, Understanding Barriers, Building Solutions or Remedies. Welcome once more to Lecture 4. Today we are going to have an honest conversation about the challenges of conducting research in the Global South. By the end of this Lecture 4, we'll be able to explain the structural funding and output gap and its impact on research productivity in the Global South. Identify infrastructural barriers comprising electricity, internet access, laboratories, and transportation, among others, and their mitigation strategies. Navigate institutional challenges regarding brain drain, heavy teaching loads, and weak ethics review boards or committees. Address cultural and methodological challenges with regard to language, colonial legacies, and community gatekeepers. Apply decolonial and indigenous research methodologies as tools for epistemological justice and develop practical strategies for overcoming these challenges via collaboration and innovation. These objectives are anchored on the key literature on the next slide. We have literature dealing with foundational literature sources for Lecture 4 with regard to UNESCO, Science Report, Confront and Godhino on productivity and publishing bias in African research, Smith regarding decolonizing research methodologies, Shilsa regarding indigenous research methodologies, Cornell regarding Southern theory, Bembe regarding decolonizing the university, Yorovu Gasheni regarding epistemic freedom in Africa, Mez regarding Ubuntu as a foundation for research. Let's at this stage know some key takeaway. The research challenges in the global south are real, but so are the solutions. Therefore, understanding the research challenges confronting the global south is the first step to overcoming them. I want us at this stage to look at a self-assessment check. What research challenges have you faced in your context, in your discipline? Let me start with the research funding challenge, perhaps the most fundamental challenge. And let's look at some stark statistics. Sub-Saharan Africa holds about 15% of the world's population, yet produces under 1% of global research output and receives 1% of global research funding. Africa invests roughly 0.4% of GDP in research and development, and this is far below the 1% African Union target. A geographical publishing bias further underrepresents Global South scholarship in high-impact journals. Next issue, concentration of continental research output. South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, and Kenya on the African continent generate over 75% of Africa's research output, leaving much of the continent underserved. Let's give an example. Regarding South Africa's research and development budget or spending. South Africa's gross expenditure on R&D was 0.62% of GDP in the 2021 and 22 period, which is far below its 1.5% national target and the 1.7% global average. This shows that research output gaps are driven by financing, not talent. Let's look at currency devaluation impact. Research grants denominated in foreign currency lose value fast when local currencies fall. For instance, the Nigerian naira lost over half of its US dollar value in 2023-2024 period, effectively shrinking research budgets mid-project. The key takeaway here is that the research funding challenge is structural, not individual. However, understanding it helps you to strategize and diversify research funding sources. Let's make a self-assessment check here. How has research funding or its absence shaped research in your discipline and context. Let's look at research infrastructure. It is a fundamental challenge for Global South researchers, and these include Barrier 1, which is unreliable electricity. Unreliable electricity disrupts research in many ways, and these include, as a researcher, you cannot run computers, servers, or laboratory equipment. You lose data during outages, and you waste research resources and time for power to return, among others. The associated mitigation strategies for researchers is to use laptops with long battery life, power banks, and generator or solar backup, and save your research works frequently. Barrier 2 is limited internet. Limited or costly internet affects research with regard to accessing online journals and databases, collaborating with international research partners, uploading and downloading research data, among others. Generally, Africa's digital divide keeps bandwidth costly and uneven. The associated mitigation strategies include using offline tools such as ODK or Kobo Toolbox, downloading resources when internet connectivity allows, and using institutional repositories and research for life, among others. Barrier 4 relates to poor transportation infrastructure. Poor roads and poor roadway networks make research field difficult in Global South, especially in rural areas where roads and networks may be impassable in the rainy season. The associated mitigation strategies include planning research fieldwork around weather and market days, using trusted local transport, and building buffer time, among others. For example, research field workers on motorbikes now carry tablets to remote communities, syncing data on return. Want to present research initiative spotlight with regard to Research for Life. Research for Life gives Global South institutions free or low-cost access to over 200,000 peer-reviewed research resources, and in 2024 marked 25 years across more than 120 countries. Its programs include Hinari for Health, Agora for Agriculture, UAR for Environment, and Goali for Law and Social Sciences. Let's give an example. Field work research in rural Adamawa state of Nigeria. Surveying smallholder farms meant working with no phone numbers and no addresses. The research team recruited community members as enumerators because they knew local customs, spoke the dialect, and were trusted. This resulted in rise of response rate. What is the lesson? The lesson here is that adapting to local realities in research is not a compromise. It is a sound method that fits the research context. There is a key takeaway here. Infrastructural challenges are real, but they can be overcome with adaptation, creativity, and right low-cost tools. Let's give a self-assessment check here. What infrastructural challenges do you face in research in your context and discipline? And how have you adapted to these challenges. We want to look at institutional and capacity research challenges. Institutional and capacity research challenges affect individual researchers and organizations, and they include Challenge 1, brain drain. Many of Africa's brightest minds live for Europe, North America, or the Gulf, among others, leaving fewer senior researchers to mentor the next generation of researchers. The associated impact is reduced capacity, weaker institutions, and loss of intellectual capital. Yet migration, if effectively harnessed, can yield brain gain through remittances, return, and diaspora network, which can be beneficial to research engagements in the global south. Challenge 2 is heavy teaching loads for academics. Academics often teach 15 to 20 hours a week, thereby leaving little time for research and writing. The associated impact of this challenge is limited output, slower promotion, and burnout of academic staff. Challenge 3 is weak ethics review boards or committees, that is IRBs and research ethics committees. Weak institutional review boards or research ethics committees mean inadequate ethical review, which can lead to ethics violations going unchecked, rejection by reputable international journals, and loss of community trust. We want to give an example, and the example is South Africa's NRF interventions. The National Research Foundation, NRF of South Africa, helped to roughly double South Africa's research output between 2000 and 2018 through targeted funding. Programs such as Tutuka, that is Emerging Researchers, and the Black Academics Advancement Program, BAP, show that relevant strategic equity for cost investment produces relevant results. Continent-wide, Delta Africa has trained thousands of researchers through African-led consortia. Delta Africa, which is developing excellence in leadership, training, and science in Africa, builds the African continent's next generation of research leaders on one principle mainly, and that is Africa's challenges are best solved by scientists and scholars grounded in local realities. Delta Africa at a glance. It was launched in 2015 by the African Academy of Sciences with Wellcome and UK's FCDO, and has the following phases. Phase 1, 2015 to 2022, with about $100 million, 11 consortia, 54 institutions, and 24 countries. Phase 2, 2023 to 2027, now led by the Science for Africa Foundation, SAF, SFA, with more than $70 million and 14 consortia. It has the following priority areas: scientific quality for world-class research on African health priorities, research leadership for mentoring young scholars from masters to senior scientists, for research systems, that's for building durable institutional infrastructure, funding, and culture, and scientific citizenship, that is for fostering equitable partnership and community and policy impact. Why does Delta Africa work? Evaluations of research capacity strengthening emphasize local ownership, long-term mentorship, and the reshift of resources to the global south. It does not emphasize one-off training. Let's give global south a spotlight of Delta Africa. Delta Africa Net grew alongside Dixon Chibanda's foundation, trained lay grandmothers, counselors, giving talk therapy, focusing on homegrown model, and this has scaled nationwide and adapted beyond the African continent. The key takeaway here is institutional challenges confronting research in the global south require institutional solutions. However, individual strategies can also help. Let's give self-assessment check here. What institutional challenges affect research in your discipline, and what support do you need? The next challenge confronting research in the global south relates to cultural and methodological research challenges, and they call for sensitivity and adaptation. These include language. Language barriers affect understanding research questions, communicating with research participants, translating research instruments, and publishing research reports in international journals, among others. The associated mitigation strategies is to translate research instruments into local languages, use bilingual numerators, and validate the translation. Challenge 2 with regard to cultural issues relate to colonial legacies. Extractive helicopter or parachute research practice has bred deep mistrust, especially in the global south. Therefore, communities may resist participation in research. The associated mitigation strategies is to build trust over time, engage community leaders, ensure benefits sharing, and practice genuine reciprocity in research engagements. Let's explain briefly helicopter or parachute research as presented in the previous slide. Helicopter or parachute research is a term for a practice where researchers, typically from the global north countries, travel to a global south country, collect data or samples, and then leave without meaningful collaboration, capacity building, or benefit sharing with the local community or local researchers or scientists. It is called parachute research because the outsiders, researchers, just drop in, complete their research work, and fly out, leaving little behind except publications that often do not include local researchers as authors. The same behavior is also described as neocolonial parasitic or safari science. A widely cited Lancet Global Health editorial urged the field to close the door on parachutes and parasites. An analysis of this practice on the world's least developed countries found that about 70% of such practice included no locally based co-author. We want to look at the peculiarities or characteristics of helicopter or parachute research. And the slide you're looking at has two columns. One dealing with characteristics and the description of such characteristics. There's the characteristic of extractive nature. In this, local resources such as data, samples, knowledge, community trust, and others are taken and exported to the global north researchers' home institution, generating prestige and career advancement for the outsider, but minimal local gain. Example: the San People's Hoodia knowledge, patented by South Africa CSIR in 1996 without their consent. Characteristic 2 is called tokenistic collaboration. In this parachute research behavior, local scientists or researchers may be involved, assisting with translation, logistics, or sample collection, but are excluded from study design, data analysis, interpretation, or authorship. In this, at best, they receive footnotes in the acknowledgements. Example: about 70% of studies on the least developed countries list no locally based co-author. Characteristic 3: no capacity building. Parachute research does not invest in local training, infrastructural, institutional strengthening of the local research environment. And some resources in the South are even depleted. If you contrast this with some African-led programs, such as those by History Africa, deliberately invest in local capacity development. Another characteristic is no benefit sharing. Communities that contributed data or biological samples receive no direct benefit in parachute research. That is, no affordable vaccines, no improved local health care, no infrastructure, and no royalties from commercial discoveries. The Nagoya Protocol of 2014 now legally requires fair benefit sharing of genetic resources. Another characteristic of parachute research is disrespect for local priorities. In this, the research agenda is set by global north researchers based on their own interests of funding priorities, not the health or development needs of the global south host community. Example: the 1090 gap. That is, historically, only about 10% of health researchers' funding address the diseases causing 90% of the global burden. Another characteristic of parachute research is weak or bypass ethics review. And in this, researchers may seek ethics approval only from their home institution, which may have limited knowledge or understanding of local realities or local context, and bypass marginalized local ethics committees. The Global Code of Conduct 2018 was created specifically to address such ethics dumping in global South settings. We want to give some illustrative examples of real-world cases from the global South. The first is biomedical by piracy, the San people and Houdia in Southern Africa. For generations, the San used the Houdia plant to suppress hunger and thirst. In 1996, South Africa's National Research Council, CSIR, patented its active appetite suppressant compound and licensed it to pharmaceutical partners without the San's knowledge, consent, or any benefit sharing. After public outcry, the 2003 agreement finally granted the San a share of royalties, and the case inspired the 2017 San Code of Research Ethics. It is the first ethics code authored by an indigenous people in Africa. The other illustrative example is genomic inequity, that is Omicron and travel bans in Southern Africa, 2021. In November 2021, scientists in South Africa and Botswana rapidly sequenced and openly promptly reported the Omicron variant to the world. In return, their countries were hit almost overnight with sweeping travel bans that battered their economies, even though the variant was already circulating elsewhere and the bans failed to contain its spread. This is a reminder that global South scientists and researchers are too often punished rather than supported for transparency and war-related issues. The alternative to helicopter or parachute research is equitable, participatory, and local-led research. And this is the very model that Delta Africa and similar initiatives are trying to build. Generally, a healthy collaborative research model has the following characteristics or features. Number one, there is a joint agenda setting. Research questions are co-developed by global North and global South partners with priority given to local health and development needs. Number two, there's meaningful authorship. Local scientists and researchers are involved from research conception to publication and are co-authors on all relevant papers reflecting their intellectual contributions. Characteristic 3, capacity building. The research project includes dedicated funding and time for training local researchers and scientists, strengthening local institutions, and developing relevant infrastructure. Characteristic 4 of collaborative research model is benefit sharing. And in this, communities receive tangible benefits such as healthcare access, infrastructural development, feedback on research findings, or royalties from commercial products, among others. Characteristic 5 is local ethics leadership. In this, research protocols receive primary approval from local ethics committees with community engagement built into the process. And characteristic 6 of collaborative research model is sustained engagement. In this, the research relationship does not end when the project ends. It continues through data analysis, publication, and dissemination. In practice, African-led programs such as Delta's Africa H35 emphasize community engagement. And these models have shown progressive improvements in research practices on the African continent. The helicopter parachute research is a term generally that captures the injustice of one-sided extractive science or knowledge. It is a legacy of colonial research structures that persist even in present times, sometimes often disguised as international collaboration in research. This rejection and the active promotion of equitable, locally led research is at the heart of efforts to reform global research ethics and practices. Some of these efforts are exemplified by the Fair and Care principle, the Delta's Africa program, and the work of organizations such as the Science for Africa Foundation. The Science for Africa Foundation, SFA Foundation, is a major Pan-African non-profit and public charity organization created to support, strengthen, and promote science and innovation across the African continent. It was established in 2021 and headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya. It grew out of the African Academy of Sciences funding platform, AESA, to become an African-owned home for the continent's flagship research program. Its major mission is to catalyze and strengthen Africa's science and innovation ecosystems to directly address the continent's sustainable development challenges and improve lives. Can be said to be African-led and African-owned. The key programs and initiatives of SFA Foundation. The SFA Foundation work is carried out via a diverse portfolio of programs designed to strengthen the entire research ecosystem. Some of its major initiatives include 1. Delta's Africa, that is developing excellence in leadership, training and science in Africa, and encouraging statistics of about £62.6 million within 2015 to 2020, then $70 million within 2023 to 2027 from Wellcome and the UK's FDO, supporting 75 institutions across 35 countries. Number 2 is Gen Impact, with a 10 million Africa-led genomics program in 2025, which builds on H3 Africa's program to advance health equity and African data sovereignty. Number 3 is Grand Challenges Africa, GC Africa. We see that scale of grants that back African innovators developing science-driven solutions to the continent's health and development priorities. The fifth one is science diplomacy and public engagement. The SFA Foundation is committed to science diplomacy, ensuring that Africa has strong voice in global scientific issues or discourse. Together, these SFA Foundation programs embody an African-led alternative to the extractive helicopter research practice. We want to make a comparison of the SFA Foundation model and the extractive helicopter research model. In the extractive helicopter research model, research agenda is set by outsiders, mostly from the global north, and often based on their own interests. The SFA Foundation model, in this research is African-led, aligned to country and regional needs identified through wide stakeholder and community consultations and engagements. The other one is the extractive helicopter research model. In this, local researchers collect data and leave with little local benefit. In the SFA Foundation model, African scientists and researchers and innovators are the primary beneficiaries and leaders of this research works, with well over $130 million channeled directly to Africa-based consortia through Data Africa alone. In the helicopter research model, local scientists are often tokenistic fixers and are excluded from authorship and leadership. In the SFA model, the SFA model employs a hub and spoke model that fosters South-to-South and intra-African collaborations, which now spans 75 institutions across 36 African countries. In the helicopter research model, there's no capacity building. Local institutions remain weak and dependent. In the SFA model, the SFA model aims to develop globally competitive science leaders and researchers, strengthen research management, culture, and infrastructure across the continent. Again, in the helicopter research model, there's little to no benefit sharing with communities. The SFA Foundation model prioritizes creating science-driven products and innovations that respond to the challenges facing the African communities. The SFA model generally operates from the fundamental principle that Africa's own scientists, researchers, who know the challenges best are best placed to solve these challenges. And in doing so, it is actively building a sustainable, equitable, and impactful research ecosystem within the African continent. By channeling major funding to African-led consortia across 36 countries and safeguarding African data sovereignty through initiatives such as Gen Impact, the SFA Foundation offers a practical model for decolonizing global research in Africa. Challenge 3: Community gatekeepers. Researchers often need permission from traditional leaders or village heads, elders, or religious authorities before engaging their research participants or respondents. This challenge, associated with the Global South, has the associated mitigation strategies such as engaging gatekeepers early, respecting local protocols, and showing how the community benefits from the research. Some associated creative solutions here include mobile phone data collection solutions, such as using ODK and Kobo tool, and these have improved the data quality and reach. Also, using GPS-enabled sampling is a solution, and this overcomes the absence of traditional sampling frames needed for research. Also, another solution is community participation, and this involves training local youth as research enumerators. Noting the Ubuntu as a research ethics, and that means that I am because we are approach offers a relational foundation for research ethics, which is distinct from the global North individualism perspective. Let's discuss decolonialism in research methodology. Beyond coping with research challenges discussed previously, Global South scholars are rethinking whose knowledge counts, and in this vein, they are decolonizing research methods by reclaiming research from colonial extraction, focusing on indigenous voice, language, and priorities. Also, they are highlighting Southern theory by asserting that knowledge produced in the Global South is theory, not just raw data for Global North analysis. They are also exercising epistemological freedom by moving from being objects of study to producers of knowledge. Research in practice by co-designing research questions with research communities, sharing authorship on data, and sharing research findings back to local communities. The key takeaway here is that cultural and methodological research challenges are not obstacles. They are invitations to innovate and to decolonize research methods, especially in the Global South. Let's give a self-assessment check. How do you build trust with research participants in your discipline and context? Let's discuss research data quality and methodological challenges. Data quality is a critical concern in Global South research. The challenges include 1. Incomplete sample frames. In the Global South, there is no up-to-date census addresses or phone numbers, and this means that conventional sampling is often impossible. The associated mitigation strategy is to use cluster sampling, random walks, snowball sampling, or GPS-enabled area sampling. Challenge 2 is social desirability bias. Research participants may give answers they think you want, especially on sensitive topics. And the associated mitigation strategy is to use indirect questions, build rapport, and translate research methods. Challenge 3 is data quality. Research data quality can be compromised by poorly trained research enumerators, badly translated research instruments, or unreliable internet for data upload. The associated mitigation strategy is to emphasize rigorous training, research instrument validation, and use of all offline data collection tools such as ODK, Kobo2, Box, etc. Some creative solutions regarding research data quality and methodological challenges. Researchers advise to use ODK and Kobo2 Box for mobile data collection, to use GPS-enabled sampling, to engage in community-led data collection, to use open source software such as R, Python for data analysis, among others. The key takeaway is that data quality is about fit. Therefore, researchers should use the right method that fits the research context. Let's give a self-assessment check here. How do you ensure data quality in your discipline and context? Now, let's discuss strategies for overcoming research challenges in the Global South. That is, practical strategies for overcoming Global South research challenges. And these include strategy 1, building research collaborations. Building research collaborations can provide access to research resources which researchers lack, bring complementary expertise to the research work, and open doors to funding and enhance quality. Suggested research collaboration types include South-South, e.g. Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, equitable North-South collaboration, and community partnerships. Strategy 2 is to seek funding aggressively. Some funding bodies include African Academy of Sciences, Science for Africa Foundation, TED Fund in Nigeria, National Research Fund in Kenya, and NRF in South Africa. Also included are IDRC, Ford Foundation, Wellcome Trust, and TWAS South-South Fellowships. Therefore, researchers are encouraged to build a grant record progressively, and this involves presenting conference papers, then writing small institutional grants, and then writing national, regional, continental, or international research grant proposals. Strategy 3 is to use open access and open source. And researchers are encouraged to publish in open access outlets and via African Journal Online to boost visibility, to use open source tools such as Python, R, JASP, etc. to avoid licensing costs, and to deposit data and preprints in repositories such as Open Science Forum, Zenodo, and Dataverse, among others. Strategy 4 is to practice methodological innovation, and this involves adapting research instruments to local contexts and languages, combining qualitative and quantitative research approaches, that is triangulation, and engaging communities as co-researchers. Strategy 5 is to invest in capacity building, and this involves attending workshops and conferences, seeking mentorship from senior researchers, forming grant writing groups, and building data analysis and software skills. The takeaway here is that Global South researchers face structural constraints but hold real advantages regarding having local knowledge, cultural competence, and access to rich research sites. Let's give self-assessment check. Which strategies will you adopt in research in your discipline and context? Let's present executive decision framework regarding how to navigate global South research challenges. The slide you're looking at presents a manager's matrix matching each recording global South research challenge to a tested response. There are two columns here, the column on research challenge and the associated solution or remedy. With regard to the challenge of limited funding, researchers advise to partner with local universities, explore IDRC, Ford Foundation, etc. grants. Regarding no sampling frame, researchers should use cluster sampling or GPS-based sampling approaches. Regarding language barriers, researchers should hire local enumerators, translate and back-translate research instruments. On low response rate, researchers should use community engagements and offer research incentives. On unreliable internet, researchers should use offline data collection tools such as ODK, Kobo2Box, etc. On port transportation issues, researchers should plan fieldwork around seasons and use local transporters. Regarding weak IRBs, researchers should use external ethics review if possible. We present executive takeaway. Executives should know that operating in global South context demands research methods tuned to local realities. Therefore, they should partner with local universities and consultancies that understand the context, treat the context as a methodological advantage, not a deficit, and budget for translation, local principal investor leadership, and community feedback. Let's give self-assessment check here. As an executive, how does the organization adapt its research methods to local context? Let's discuss thesis dissertation connection regarding lecture 4. Postgraduate students are advised to acknowledge contextual constraints such as data access, funding, infrastructure in their research limitations and turn these limitations into a contribution, not an apology, in their research works. Example of a limitation statement for postgraduate students. This study was conducted in rural Adamawa state of Nigeria, where infrastructural constraints required adapting data collection methods. While this limits generalizability, the innovations developed such as offline collection and community-based enumerator training offer practical guidance for similar research contexts. The key takeaway for postgraduate students is that they should frame their research constraints as contributions, not just limitations. Let's give a self-assessment check here. How would you acknowledge conceptual constraints in your thesis or dissertation? Let's test your understanding regarding discussions in lecture 4. Question 1. What percentage of global research funding originates in sub-Saharan Africa? The answer is about less than 1%. Question 2. Which organization provides free or low-cost access to academic content for institutions in low-income countries? The answer is Research for Africa. Research for Life. Question 3. What is the primary challenge associated with weak institutional review boards in Global South institutions? The answer is inadequate ethical review, which can lead to ethical violations and publication rejections. Question 4 is a true or false answer. Community consent is rarely needed in the Global South research context. This is false because community consent is often required alongside individual consent. Question 5. Which of the following is a creative solution for conducting research in low resource settings of the Global South? The answer is mobile phone-based data collection, and this leads to adapting to the research context. Here's your take-home task, and the task is to list 3 concrete coping strategies which you will adopt over the next 6 months to overcome a specific research challenge you face in your research context or discipline. A key takeaway is that turning research challenges into strategies is a mark of a resilient researcher. Let's summarize lecture 4. The salient points here is that we discussed the funding and output gap, noting that under 1% of global funding, despite 15% of population, is associated with Africa specifically. Number 2, we examine infrastructural barriers in research such as electricity, internet access, transportation issues, in addition to their mitigation strategies. We also examine the institutional and capacity challenges in research such as brain drain, teaching loads, weak ethics review, among others. In addition, we discuss cultural and methodological challenges such as language, colonial legacies, gatekeepers, and the colonial practices. Finally, we presented practical mitigation strategies including collaboration, innovation, and adaptation. The major research concepts or ideas that run through lecture 4 include decolonial and indigenous methodologies which emphasize local voice, language, and priorities. Southern theories and epistemological freedom, which sees Southern knowledge as theory, not as raw data. Ubuntu research ethics, which is a relational I am because we are foundation for consent and reciprocity. Context adaptive sampling, such as cluster, snowball, and GPS-enabled area sampling, where sampling frames are absent. Mobile and online data collection tools such as ODK and Kobo Toolbox, which are used for challenging research field settings. Validity safeguards or strategies such as translation and back translation plus triangulation of research methods to reduce the social desirability bias or errors. And community-based and participatory research, which involves gatekeeper engagement, local enumerators, and benefit sharing. At this stage, let's preview lecture 5. In lecture 5, we will move from research challenges to research tools. That is research problem formulation and systematic literature review. We urge you to stay curious, to stay methodologically rigorous and flexible, and to stay contextually relevant. Let's continue the research journey Thank you.